After a massive week 7 in college football, we've got a big shakeup in the rankings heading into week 8. I'm going to give you my updated top 25. Again, I talked about this last week. We have now shifted into really the resume rankings. That's how we're ranking teams now because so many teams have been up and down, so inconsistent. It's hard to judge. You know, you look at a team one week and say that looks like a top 10 team, and the next week that looks like a team that's not shouldn't even be ranked. And so where do you rank teams like that? And that's really been kind of the story of this season. Inconsistency, parity. It's very hard to rank teams. So we're jumping into the resume rankings now, and that's how we're going to be ranking these teams throughout the rest of the season. Kind of just doing it how the playoff rankings, how the playoff committee would rank these teams. So let's get into it here. Here is 21 through 25. Illinois at number 21. They beat Kansas, Purdue, and Nebraska. Nebraska really their best win, their only decent win. Nebraska is borderline top 25. I think probably they'd be number 26 for me. So yeah, for Illinois, I know the Purdue game was not good, but if you're ranking these teams based on resume, you're not supposed to look at the winning margin. If you look at the playoff committee criteria, it says in there they don't look at the winning margin. So yeah, they're not ranked as high as they were last week. It's not really that they dropped. Again, I do this from scratch every week. I don't look at the previous week's rankings. I just list the teams, the resumes, and then I rank them however, which is also how the committee is supposed to rank these teams. So Illinois, number 25, barely staying in these rankings. Navy at number 24. So you see Navy, but you don't see Army. And I just cannot justify ranking Army right now. They just don't have anything on the resume. There's really nothing there. No quality wins. Navy at least has a win over a pretty good Memphis team, a one-loss Memphis team. And so that's enough to get them into these rankings. And, of course, they haven't lost a game. Arizona State at number 23. So it's interesting with 21 through 23. Washington State beat Texas Tech. Texas Tech beat Arizona State. So you can use the head-to-head to separate those teams. Arizona State won over Mississippi State, won over Kansas, and won over Utah. Utah win is really why they are in these rankings. And again, their loss was to a top 25 Texas Tech team. Texas Tech beat Arizona State, like I said. They also have wins over Cincinnati and Arizona, and that one loss coming to Washington State. Washington State, again, they beat Texas Tech. They also beat Washington. So a couple of good wins, and also their loss came to Boise State, who is a top 25 team. So you don't have a bad loss there. Washington State at number 21. Let's move on to the 16 through 20 range. We'll start with Missouri at number 20. So after the beatdown by Texas A&M, you wondered about Missouri, and they didn't play this week, so we'll see what they look like this week. But what helped them, even on a bye week, is Vanderbilt winning again. So Vanderbilt is now a team that I considered for the top 25. I mean, I strongly considered them. I considered them a little bit last week. But they do have 2 losses, and one of those is a bad loss. So for you to get in these rankings at this point, if you've got 2 losses, you've got to have 2 solid wins to kind of balance out or counter those 2 losses. And no one with 2 losses right now has 2 good wins. So yeah, anyways, Missouri wins over Vanderbilt and Boston College. Yeah, they got blown out by Texas A&M, but again, we're not supposed to look at winning margin, and so Missouri does come in at number 20. Boise State, number 19. The win over Washington State, that's now a ranked win, a top 25 win. Loss to Oregon doesn't look so bad now. It never looked bad, but they were very close to beating Oregon, who is potentially the best team in the country. So that loss actually helps them, and I think you can make an argument that Boise State could be ranked higher. But I need to see a little bit more on the resume besides just Washington State. SMU, number 18. They've got a win over Louisville. That is a team that was considered for the top 25, so that's a pretty good win. A couple other Power 4 wins with TCU and Florida State. And then their loss coming to BYU. BYU is a top 5 team. If you missed my rankings last week, you'll see that this week. Yes, BYU is a top 5 team based on their resume. Kansas State, number 17. Wins over Tulane, Arizona, Oklahoma State, Colorado. They have piled in some wins. None of these are great wins, but they're all decent wins. And again, if you look at the playoff committee and how they rank teams, at the end of the year, they give teams credit for wins over 6-6, 7-5 type teams. And I think people a lot of times just look at the top end wins for teams, but the committee, at least, they value all those pretty good wins. And again, Kansas State's got 4 of them. They only lost to BYU, who again is a top 5 team. So Kansas State number 17. Tennessee 5-1, wins over Oklahoma, NC State, and Florida. This team doesn't look great right now, but Florida, Oklahoma, decent wins. The Arkansas loss was a tough one, but the Vols staying in here at number 16. Let's move on to 11 through 15. So LSU with a big win this weekend. The resume still is not great for them. They've got a win over South Carolina, who is now, I think, got 3 losses. UCLA's not a good win. Ole Miss is a very solid win, but Ole Miss is not ranked. They've got 2 losses now. So LSU with some decent wins. And then they also got the loss to USC, who's not ranked, and they've got 3 losses now. So LSU at 15, I think a lot of people might put them higher. But again, based off that resume, it's hard to go higher than 15. Texas A&M at number 14, wins over Florida, Arkansas, and Missouri. So Missouri is a top 25 win for them. And the only loss came to Notre Dame. Notre Dame is a top 10 team, at least based off of resume. So you see the Aggies there ahead of LSU. Clemson, number 13. Loss came to Georgia. The Georgia loss doesn't look as good because Georgia's continues to struggle a little bit. And then you look at their wins: Florida State, NC State, Stanford, Wake Forest. Not a lot on the resume. Kind of similar to what Kansas State's got. They've got some decent wins, but not any great wins. And so Clemson at number 13, Indiana at number 12. So Pittsburgh and Indiana are very similar. They're undefeated. They're 6-0. You have to give them credit for that. But neither team has much on the resume, at least not any great wins. But they've got some decent wins. Pitt's got West Virginia, Cincinnati, North Carolina, and Cal. Indiana's got Maryland, UCLA, and Northwestern. Big opportunity for Indiana against Nebraska this weekend. But just outside the top 25, a couple of undefeated teams. We now go to the top 10. We've got Notre Dame at number 10. The Irish with a blowout win over Stanford. They also have wins over Louisville, who's, again, borderline top 25. And Texas A&M. So a nice top 25 win there. That kind of, one of those wins you could cancel out with the Northern Illinois loss. And again, even if you did that, you'd still have another win. So if Notre Dame only had 1 good win, I think they'd be a lot lower. But with 2 good wins, that again gets them into the top 10, even with the bad loss. Miami at number 9, no game this weekend. They're 6-0. Resume, it's lacking a little bit there. But Virginia Tech, Florida, decent wins. Cal's a decent win. You've got Iowa State at number 8. I think their resume's a little bit better. Wins over Iowa, Houston, Baylor, and West Virginia. An Iowa win looks good. Iowa is a borderline top 25 team. Georgia struggled this week against Michigan State, but they've got wins over Clemson, Kentucky, and Auburn. Decent wins there, and their only loss coming to a number 6 Alabama. Alabama wins over South Carolina. They've got the great win over Georgia, and then a blowout win over Wisconsin, which now looks a little bit better. So Alabama's resume hanging in there. Again, not going to penalize them for struggling against South Carolina because we're not looking at the win margin, just looking at the resumes here. And now we get to the top 5. So this is my top 5. Ohio State at number 5. Look, if I was just ranking the teams, I would have Ohio State probably 3 because it looked like they could have easily beaten Oregon, and so I understand that argument. But resume wise, they've got the win over Iowa. That's really about it. So if we're ranking them on their resume, you give them credit for almost beating Oregon, yes. But you have to also have some wins in there to really be considered, to stay in that top 3. So the Buckeyes at number 5 for now. Penn State at number 4. West Virginia, Illinois, UCLA, USC. Some decent wins there, but BYU just has a better resume. SMU and Kansas State, 2 top 25 wins. Also Baylor and Arizona. So for me, I can't say for sure that Penn State's a better team than BYU, so we have to look at the resume, and BYU has the better resume. So the Cougars up to number 3 after an easy win this past weekend. Now, technically, yeah, BYU does have a better resume than Texas, but I look at these teams, and Texas has just been the more dominant team. BYU and Penn State have had their close games, where they didn't look as dominant. And so, again, resume, yes, these rankings are based off resume, but if I feel confidently that a team is better than another team, and again, I feel like Texas is better than BYU, and I can confidently say that. They both have 0 losses. Can I confidently say Penn State's better than BYU? I really can't, because we've seen Penn State struggle a little bit at times. So, yeah, I think Penn State's probably better than BYU, but I don't have enough to say that definitively, and that's why I have BYU ahead of Penn State. But Texas, I think I can say that. Of course, they're going to get a big test against Georgia. Oregon, though, has the best resume. They've got a win over Boise State. That's a top 25 win, and then a top 5 win over Ohio State. They have no losses. To me, you have to rank Oregon number 1. I think Texas might be better than Oregon. I think Texas might be the best team in the country. But again, I can't say that for sure. And so then we come to the resume, and Oregon, to me, clearly has the best resume in all of college football. So those are my updated top 25 rankings, and give me your thoughts and your rankings down in the comments below.